Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Sergi, and welcome to Talk Shop, the place where we chat with experts from many different industries about issues that affect your work, your life, and of course, your communication. Today's topic, I'm going to get straight to it here, is resilience, doing well in the face of adversity. And given the state of the climate, of society, of politics, of family dynamics, of all of this, resilience is a topic on the minds of many of you out there. And my guest today, I am very honored to welcome him here, is one of Canada's leading speakers on the subject of resiliency, Mark Black. Mark Black, speaker, author, husband, and father of three, was born with a life-threatening heart defect. His childhood was filled with surgeries and health scares, and at the age of 22, with his life on the line, he received a rare heart and double lung transplant. Never one to let limitations define him, Mark went on to become the only person in history to complete a marathon with someone else's heart and lungs. Today, Mark helps people around the world handle their own difficulties by teaching them his strategies and principles for resiliency. His new book, The Resilience Roadmap, is available on his website and on online booksellers around the world. Welcome to Talk Shop, Mark Black. It is such a pleasure to have you on here. I believe that I was thinking right before we got on that we actually met in 2016 at the Canadian Speakers Association convention in Edmonton. But
Yeah.
this is the first time I've had you on my program, and I'm embarrassed about that.
Hey, anytime is a good time. I'm grateful to be here, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Well, you are one of Canada's gems, and I know that you've had a really, really hectic speaking schedule over the past several years because I think of your area of expertise,
Yeah.
because you are the guy to talk about resilience. And so, heading into this, could you tell us what resilience means to you specifically? What is Mark's personal definition of that word?
Thank you. Yeah. So I believe resilience is not bouncing back, it is growing through. So here's what I mean. I think that a lot of us have that been taught a version of the definition of bouncing back from adversity. I think we've heard that a lot. And I think it's a misconception for a couple of reasons. One, there's no going back. Like, unless anybody's invented a time machine, we can't go back to and certainly pre-COVID, like, that world no longer exists,
Yeah.
right? But yesterday doesn't exist either, so whatever. And so rather than trying to return to what was, because that's not possible, let's try and become better versions of who we are tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And one of the great instigators of that growth, in my opinion, is the very things that we think are problems. It's the challenges and adversities that we face that force us to grow, that help us to become who we could be.
Okay. And do you define problems in a certain way? Because it feels to me that very often, at least with a lot of the more toxic self-help stuff that's out there, there's almost a urge to minimize certain problems and, oh well, your problem in perspective, your problem isn't as big as someone
Right.
else's problem. And that
Yeah.
might be true, but there's still problems. So how would you define a problem?
I think anything that you initially see as adverse
Mhm.
in some way, big or small. And I love that you mentioned that, because that is one of the pieces of feedback that I get when I speak, actually, is as we'll probably get into, I have a pretty dramatic story of adversity, and people will come up afterwards and share their stories with me, almost always prefaced with, well, nothing like what you went through. And I always say to them, but that isn't the point, right? Because my experience is unique to me, and I have my set of tools to deal with my stuff, and you've gone through what you've gone through, and you have your own tools and your own frame of reference for dealing what you've been through, and those are completely incomparable. And so why are we trying to do that? And why are we trying to say that, my pain or my adversity is worse than yours, or vice versa? Who does that help? And to your point, minimizing a challenge by saying you're not supposed to be upset by that, it's not particularly helpful.
No, it's not, because the fact is you're upset, and that's the issue there. Like, you still, whether or not you think you should be, it's still an emotion that you have to deal with, that you have to wrestle with and find some kind of path through. And sometimes I think that the things that we think wouldn't be a problem versus the things that end up being a problem. We can't always predict what that's going to be either.
Right.
Now you've been through more than the average person's share of challenges, of course. I mentioned that in your introduction, and in the resilience roadmap, you share your heart and lung transplant story, which is remarkable. And you also mentioned challenges like the pandemic eviscerating your speaking business,
Hmm.
which in our industry, I mean, I remember people coming on to onto meeting calls and Zoom meetings with our speaker association, just looking shell shocked and not
Yeah.
knowing what to say as the bottom fell out. Now, these are very, very different circumstances, of course. And as we just mentioned, the difference in those circumstances isn't really what matters when we're talking about resilience. So, what can you recommend to people in terms of opening up space to acknowledge their problems, maybe to grieve what's going on, to make space to acknowledge that, yes, I am going through something right now and I have to come to terms with that rather than suppress it and try to be, optimistic or just in denial that something's going on in my life.
Right. I love that. So the resilience roadmap is a roadmap. It is a 7-part framework, and the first 2 parts of that framework are acknowledge and then accept. So how do we, first of all, we must acknowledge that there's a problem there. We must acknowledge that we are feeling how we're feeling and that that is okay. Right.
Mhm.
Unless and until we begin there, then we're beginning from a place of denial or minimizing how we feel, which is counterproductive. So it's okay to feel however we're feeling. We got to begin there. Now, we probably don't want to stay in that space, especially if it's a kind of a negative emotional space, but we have to start there. And then from there we kind of go, okay, so and what parts of this do I need to come to terms with because they are not changeable? So in any adverse situation, there are going to be aspects of that situation that are outside of our control. So the pandemic, there were large portions of that we none of us, well, probably nobody listening to this call was directly involved in creating health policy or developing vaccines, and so therefore you didn't have any direct control over if or when this pandemic was going to end and how that was going to directly impact your individual life. So we have to let go of those things, because until we do, we will be wasting valuable time, energy, resources fighting against that. And that can be manifested in a lot of ways, instead of investing those resources where they're going to make an impact, where we can actually make a change. And so that's why I begin the book talking about acknowledging that the problem is there, and again, not judging that
Mhm.
and not judging our own feelings, and then saying, okay, what parts of this can I accept so that I can move on and do something about it. And in there is also a third piece of that is agency, understanding that fundamentally, as much as there are parts of it we can't control, there are always things that we can. We have personal agency, we have the ability to respond, and leveraging that is going to help us to cope more effectively with whatever it is we're dealing with.
It's a very stoic outlook. And I mean that like in the classical sense. This is
Yes.
very it really
Yes.
makes me think of classical stoicism
Yes.
as a philosophy, which is actually has a lot of self-compassion in it as well.
It is, you're right, and you're absolutely bang on again. And most, it's funny because I didn't realize that until I read some of Ryan Holiday's work.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with him, Google him. He's like a fantastic author who's sort of brought this ancient Greek philosophy into the modern era and made it very practical and tangible. But you're absolutely right, and it was not intentional on my part. This was how I got through the transplant story that you heard about, and
Yeah.
then and applied my business all the time. And it was only in retrospect that I went, "Oh, this is all nothing new under the sun," right? Like,
Yeah. It's ancient wisdom. And I think something that a lot of live humans by yourself, you are able to say, wow, hey, wait a minute. This is something that we can figure out and apply. You don't need to have been reading the writings of Marcus Aurelius to know, oh, wait a minute, if we view it like this, if I do this and take this mindset, then it works out.
No, absolutely. It's this stuff works, and that's why it's been around as long as it's been around, and why it continues to be relevant, is because it's practical. It's Stoicism is incidentally something, I've studied a fair bit of philosophy, and I'd argue it's the most practical of all the philosophies that at least I'm aware of. It's very much, you know, tangible on the ground things that we can do each day. It's not esoteric. It's not,
Yeah.
deep in your head stuff. It's how do you day to day live life and do it in the most effective way possible.
So, what do you find most often affects people's view of their own resilience? Because some people think that they're not, and others think that they are. Where does that mindset come from?
I mean, lots of different play. I think basically folks who have a more fixed mindset, who believe that we're born with what we're born with, those are our tools. And so therefore we all have certain natural abilities that we possess and others that we don't. And they think resilience is one of those. So if you were lucky, then you're a resilient person. You were born with that set of that set of traits or that character, and if not, not. And I would suggest that while there may be a small part of this that is nature versus nurture, the small part of it that's nurture, or that's nature rather, that you were born with, I think the majority of resilience is actually nurture. It's learned.
Mhm.
It's something that you can. It's a set of skills. It's a tangible set of skills that you can learn. And so if you believe that I'm not a resilient person, then obviously you have that obstacle of your mindset to overcome. But if you fundamentally believe that you are resilient and that you can become more resilient, then it's just a question of learning the skills and practicing them. And I firmly believe that's the case. I think every single one of us has an inherent amount of resilience in us from the time, back in our DNA from the time we were cave people. It's why human beings are still around. And then from there, you can develop even more resilience by developing the skills and the tools that you need that I've tried to provide in this book.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So I don't want to give away the book because I want people to buy the book. It's a very
Mhm.
good book and you all should buy it, really and truly. I'm very, very lucky that you let me read an advanced copy of it. In terms of building up that impression of I am a resilient person, for those of us who may often doubt our resilience, do you have any day to day, like little steps on a daily basis that people can take to start instilling that belief in themselves? I have agency. I can affect my surroundings, just kind of like the little tiny things that we can drip in.
Yeah, sure. So one of the steps in the book is about adaptability, and I encourage people to practice what I call strategic discomfort, which essentially means when the stakes are not high. Because when we need resilience is when the stakes are higher and the tools need to be there already and be, you want your knife to be sharp when you need to cut with it. You don't want to be trying to sharpen it while you need to cut with
Yeah.
it. So sharpen the saw ahead of time. And so you practice these things. And one of the things you can do is strategic discomfort, which simply means practice putting yourself in slightly uncomfortable situations, survive that situation, and reinforce that neurocircuitry in your brain that says, oh, this thing that I'm not comfortable doing is not going to kill me. It's not even probably going to be painful. It's just going to be a little uncomfortable. It's going to maybe feel weird. And if I reinforce that message over and over again by doing some things that are a little uncomfortable, then when the uncomfortable thing comes that I don't have an option but to face, I feel more empowered to be able to do it. So that might look like something as simple as driving a different way to work in the morning,
Mhm.
or eating with the wrong hand, or what I do cold showers, which sounds a little wild to people, but really is, I start with warm water because I haven't reached the point where I can jump into the cold water. But I always end the shower with I try to last between 30 seconds and a minute of all the way cold. It's uncomfortable. I continue to do it precisely because I don't want to.
Yeah.
And because once I'm out, I have won that small victory over myself that day that says you can do things that are difficult. So that's the first piece. I think another thing that maybe will give you the courage to do that is what I call an adversity inventory, which basically says look back through your life, or if you prefer a shorter amount of time, look back through your year, your week, your month, and just list the things that have challenged you. And then say to yourself, okay, well, I'm still here. So clearly I survived. How did I cope with those things? How successful was I at coping with those things? And then understand you're the person who did that. So, one of the phrases that I give to folks and that I use myself is if I can do that, then I can do this, whatever this challenge before me is. I'm the same person that did all of that stuff. So, if I did all of that stuff, then I can handle whatever this is because reality is 99% of the time, whatever you're facing tomorrow will not be the hardest thing you've ever had to do.
Hmm.
And so you can say to yourself, if I'm the person that did whatever that big thing was back in my past, then I have all the tools I need to do whatever this thing is.
We don't often take stock of the stuff that we've done, of the hard things. We remember the hard, but not the fact that we did it. And it's really powerful, that suggestion, to list them out and look at them and, almost from that third party perspective, say, oh wow, I did that thing. I got through that thing. And it wasn't someone else, it was me. So surely I can get through this next thing.
Right. And I mean, you and I are both parents. So if you think back to like, in the case of a mother, you can think back to the actual birth. For us fathers, we have to think about periods after that. But you think about those weeks and months when you bring a new baby home and the sleepless nights and and the spit ups and the diaper changes and all of that stuff that is, let's face it, challenging.
Hmm.
And you go, well, I'm the person that survived that. So on the day when I'm dragging my butt and I'm a little bit tired in the morning, and I go, well, wait a minute, I had 7 hours of sleep this time, and I went for months where I had 3 or 4. So clearly I can do this, right? And it just kind of gives you that extra bit of confidence to know I have the confidence and the competence, the capacity to deal with this stuff. One of my favorite quotes, Marie Forleo says, everything is figure outable, right? And I love that idea of just if you approach every problem with that belief, then suddenly the problem instantly becomes smaller because you're like, okay, well, there is a solution. I don't know what it is yet, but I believe there is one, and I believe I have the tools to figure it out.
Yeah. Marie's great. I adore Marie as well. Her The Everything is Figure Outable book is on my shelf, and it's one of those things that you can reach out and grab if you need a little bit of a boost. Now,
Mm-hmm.
just about everything on this channel comes back to communication at some point. That's my geek. So here we go for this round. What roles, both the good and the bad, because you can't have one without the other, I suppose, but I like to look at both. Does communication play in terms of people's resilience?
Oh, huge. I mean, so first from that beginning piece you talked about in terms of acknowledgement, right? So when I'm dealing with something challenging, one way to immediately acknowledge it and begin the process of dealing with it is to communicate it, right? So whether that's a personal issue and I need to be speaking about that with my partner, my best friend, my mentor, to say, hey, I like put my hand up, I've got this challenge I'm dealing with, can you help me think through it, can you help me strategize about it, is huge. I think a lot of the time we have this misconception, especially in North America, that we're supposed to be super individualistic, we're supposed to be super independent, and I'm supposed to solve all my problems on my own, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Uh, so leverage your ability to talk to other people about your challenge. I mean, you don't want to be the person that shows up in the office and just constantly vents all the time, maybe. But we need to not be shy to say, hey, I need some help with this. Um, when you can clarify clearly what the problem is, that becomes super important. And so that's an essence of communication as well, right? Can we distill the problem down to something that's digestible and easy to express? That helps us to see it clearly and therefore deal with it more effectively. Oftentimes when it kind of swirls in our head, it feels bigger than it is.
Hmm.
And if we can get it down on paper or out in a conversation, that suddenly goes, oh, okay, maybe it's not so overwhelming to deal with. And then how we communicate with ourselves, I think, would be the third thing. So what are you saying to yourself about this challenge that you're facing? Are you saying everything's figure outable? I'm the person who did that, so I can do this? Or are you saying messages of self-doubt and self-criticism that are going to disempower you from dealing with whatever it is you're facing?
So lots of people are uncomfortable talking about their needs as well. We can talk to ourselves at some point. We're going to have to reach out to others as well. So for those of us who have a lot of difficulty opening up, saying, I need help, or I'm dealing with this thing, I'm need you to give me a bit of grace. What advice do you have for people who struggle with opening up about their situation and asking for other people to help them be resilient?
Um, so first, I would say let's dissuade ourselves from the idea that that's a sign of weakness.
Mhm.
That's a sign of strength. I think real weakness is saying I'm too afraid of what you'll think of me to be willing to share openly how I feel. That's weakness. Strength is saying I'm okay. I'm okay. I know my value, and the fact that I have a challenge doesn't take away from that, and therefore I'm okay to share that I'm not perfect with you, and that's okay. To me, that's strength. Um, I think we all have a natural inclination to self judge, and so sometimes it's helpful also and to be harder on ourselves than we are on other people. So
Mhm.
I think another helpful thing is to sometimes do the third person thing instead and pretend if I was somebody else, if I was someone I cared about, if I was my mentor or mentee, if I was somebody who was coming to me with this same problem, what would my advice be to that person? And all of a sudden, we become instantly more compassionate because it's not us anymore; it's somebody else. And we would probably tell that person, "We'll talk it out and look for help." And we give all of the advice that we actually need, but we don't want to take ourselves. So sometimes it's getting that distance and just saying, if I were my son, my daughter, my mom, my dad, my coworker that I care about, what would I tell that person?
That's again, it's that very, very sage advice. What would you tell someone else? If you would give them that grace, then you'd probably should do it for yourself too. And of course, if it's the discomfort, and like you said, that was so powerful, being afraid that being honest about your situation will make someone think less of you. That's an ego thing, straight up getting
100%.
in the way. And if that's what's
100%.
making you afraid, you can say, I can take that cold shower. If I can do that, then surely I can do this. Now you have put out such a gift in the form of your new book. Can you hold it up for us, Mark? Because I've got a digital copy, but you have a physical copy. Show us Resilience Roadmap.
I do.
Let's get
I
that
do. I
beautiful
appreciate
thing
it.
on the screen. Does it still smell like new book?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And yeah, and I will make sure that you have a real one in
Oh,
your hands
thank you.
soon.
Um,
Yes.
it's an amazing book. Like I said at the beginning, I see it as the antidote that we need to a lot of the toxic positivity messages that come through, like choose happiness or this too shall pass. Like the well, I suppose this too shall pass is a bit of stoicism, but the toxic stuff that causes us to push it
Yes.
down,
Yes.
this is a practical antidote to all of that. And what struck me about the book, Mark, is that the stories you share, the way that you walk people through the roadmap, through a resilience journey, is realistic, still positive, still affirming, but very realistic and practical in that you keep us moving forward step by step. This is how you get through adversity.
Mm.
So, could you tell us a little bit about the book, about how it came about and where we can get it?
I would love to. Thank you.
Yes.
So I began the book. It's actually shocking to me. So I pulled the book out during COVID when, as speakers, we had a lot of free time all of a sudden.
A
And I
sudden
had,
surge of creative written energy.
yeah, it's like all of a sudden I have all this time because I can't speak in front of people anymore. So I pulled the book out that I had been working on it, and I opened the Word file, and I was shocked to see that the creation date was sometime early 2018. So this has been bubbling for a while, and I had written, I guess, 100 some odd pages, and then anybody who's written a book understands this feeling of you write, and then sometimes you just get stuck.
Hmm.
And I was in that stuck, and I just couldn't look at it anymore. And so I put it on the shelf, and this was the time to pull it back out and try and make sense of what I had written. And from mm, late 2020 until uh, early 2022, I was able to finish the rough draft. And then, of course, you go through the editing process, which takes a lot of time, and refining those ideas and reorganizing those ideas to finally create this book. And then you go into production and take some time. So anyway, really, really excited to finally have it. I finally have it out in the world. And again, yeah, it was written with the idea that I've been teaching this stuff for a decade, but I wanted it to be in a form that you don't need to hire me to speak or hire me to consult and coach with your organization, you can buy the book and have everybody read it. And I think it will have a major impact. Now, I'm certainly happy to come and help you implement it, but I think you can get a lot of value just from the book itself. Again, because it was written to be imminently practical, not theoretical, not an intellectual exercise,
Yeah.
but something that you can read and go, okay, I'm going to go and do that and see how that works out. There's an activity, there's an action at the end of every chapter. There's tools that you can implement immediately, and the hope is that it makes a tangible impact in the lives of other people. One of the initiatives I'm doing with the launch of the book actually is one of the groups of people I thought about a lot while I was writing this book were frontline healthcare workers, who, of course, at the time and to this, and as we record this, are still going through incredibly challenging times. At that point, it was more about the stress of COVID and all of the restrictions that created. Now it's more about staffing shortages, but
Yeah.
the challenges continue. And these are people who I am alive today thanks to the work that they have done. And so I wanted to give them some tools to help them survive and hopefully thrive through this incredibly challenging time. And so one of the initiatives we've created is to do a kind of a fundraiser sponsorship program, so that organizations, companies, individuals can buy copies of the book that will be sponsored, and we will give those books to nurses and physicians and other people on the front lines of healthcare. And so we've successfully funded about 1,500 copies of those so far, which I'm really excited to send off. I now have to sit with stacks of books to sign them and put the sponsor stickers on them. But I'm super excited about that, and can't wait to deliver those books to those folks and say thank you. So it's
Oh,
exciting.
that is such an awesome initiative, Mark, and generous and insightful. And yes, support our healthcare workers, because what they went through in COVID is partially a symptom of a much bigger problem, and they need
Mm,
support, and
indeed.
they need stuff like this. So not just for the book, of course, which everyone is going to go out and get right now, help support Mark's work,
Thank
but
you. Thank
also
you.
for
Thank
you,
you.
if people want to know more about you, how you can come in and work with their organizations, get you on stage at their conference, or even just to get a copy of their book, of your book for themselves, where can we find you?
Very simple. Markblack.ca. We're Canadian, so it's .ca, not .com. You won't find me there. But markblack.ca, you'll find all the info about me. You'll find the book is there as well. You can also get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you like to buy books. But that's markblack.ca is where you'll find it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to everyone who joined us for today's interview all about resilience. Get the book, Resilience Roadmap. It is via Mark's website or your favorite online book retailer. Mark, thanks again. I hope to have you back soon, because I think you have so much to share with everyone on this topic. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Talk Shop. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Lauren.